Hello, and welcome to the sixth episode of Header Footer Presents. This time we're going to talk about artists and artworks that have inspired us. But first of all, the recognition. So, the Header Footer Gallery is part of the New Media Caucus and is dedicated to promoting the creative output of our members by situating their work in thoughtfully curated exhibitions that take place across our entire web presence. New Media Caucus is an international nonprofit association formed to promote the development and understanding of new media art. We represent and serve artists, designers, practitioners, historians, theorists, educators, students, and scholars, recognizing new media art to be inherently interdisciplinary, multimodal, and evolving. We support and advance a wide range of inquiry to catalyze further evolution of the field. The New Media Caucus is committed to extending and sustaining the diversity of our community, board, and membership to promote an environment of equality, inclusion, and respect for difference. We prioritize inclusion as an ongoing collaborative process of growth that we continually address both within the caucus and in our field. Okay, so now that that's taken care of, let's move on to Connie. You want to tell us what we're doing?
Sure. Today we're going to be talking about the works that influence us or made us who we are in our individual careers and just educators, etc. So these are all from all over the place, right? They're different mediums, some video works. Who should we start with right now? Do you want to go first right now?
Well,
we
I
can
don't know.
alternate too.
You have the oldest work in here.
We can alternate as well if you want.
But yeah, I think you should start. You have the oldest one working. It's the more popular one, so everybody knows this one.
Sure. Okay. So the first work that I wanted to discuss was actually La Pieta by Michelangelo. It is located right now in Vatican City at St. Peter's Basilica. And to me, La Pieta is one of the finest sculptural marvels that I've ever seen, and I always have a delightful time teaching in this piece because of the way that it's actually constructed, right? It's a very large piece. And I think when I went to Mexico City, we saw a copy of it, right, Renee?
Oh, yeah, we did.
Yeah, which museum was it again?
The Sumaya. No, yeah, Sumaya, Museo Sumaya.
Yeah, and so they had a replica there as well. So what's interesting about La Pieta is, again, the way that it's actually created by Michelangelo. It's structural. The Virgin Mary is actually quite large in comparison. And so because in order for her to be able to carry or hold Christ after the crucifixion, right, who has been taken down, her joints had to be contorted in a very interesting way. So I don't know if a lot of people know that, right, that her joints are moved and they're sort of been dislocated in order to be able to carry Christ in the piece as well. One of the funniest or an interesting myth about La Pieta is actually this idea that Michelangelo heard or overheard someone say, oh, this piece must have been created by a different sculptor, right, or a different artist. And so Michelangelo got upset, and what he did is that after they had gone, he went and carved his name, saying Michelangelo Buonarroti, Florentine, was making this on the sash across Virgin Mary's chest. And it was one of the only works that he ever signed. So again, this myth behind the Pieta, but also that it could have happened as well, is very interesting to me. So that's just a little bit about La Pieta and Michelangelo.
Why is it influential to you?
Why is it influential to me? Because
yes.
I think the way why it's influential to me. That's a good question. It's really changed the way that I see the way that bodies are sculpted. Because to me, the body is always very important in the work that I do, right? I study it, performance, etc. But the way that the Virgin Mary, the body and the way that it's been dislocated in order to be able to carry Christ, I thought that was very interesting. And it's the same thing with Michelangelo's David, which when you look at it, it was supposed to actually be constructed on top of a building. And so the proportions aren't necessarily accurate, right? I think his head is a little bit bigger, his eyes are very large. And so that's one of the things that really fascinates me, like in terms of not only the body, but also the way that things are supposed to be seen, right? For me, visual culture and visual studies is always very important. And so that's one of the things that I all the works that I've chosen for this podcast episode have to do with visual studies and the way that we look.
Mm.
And sometimes things trick our eye, right? And being able to see things in a different light. So,
Yeah, the Piet, well, Michelangelo in general, except when it comes to painting actual women, he's very aware of space and the place, the location where his work is supposed to be. So, like the La Pieta is a triangle. It's built like a
yes.
triangle in a way that allows you to see like a very imposing figure. You have this gigantic Christ but it makes the Virgin look smaller, which is what it should be. Even though she's bigger, if you look
Mhm.
at it from the bottom to up, it goes back to how it's supposed to be seen, right? It
Mm.
makes this gigantic Christ, this very small Virgin, and it's his awareness of perspective, right? Like he knows that if you're looking up at it, if he doesn't make the Virgin bigger, it's gonna
Yeah,
look microscopic.
exactly.
And with the David, it's the same thing. Like, which is funny because the David has this weird thing, right? When you look at it from like at where he's placed right now, he looks very heroic and very valiant, right? But when you go and you look at him from above, he looks like he's crapping his pants. He's terrified, and it's on purpose.
Okay.
Absolutely. Like his expression, his facial expression, looking at from above is very scared, and that's because he's supposed to be looking at Goliath, right?
That's interesting because the way that I teach it, I think about it as it's very contemplative, right? As opposed to Bernini's David, which is very performative, right? It's caught in motion, and the David by Michelangelo is very contemplative. Like he's trying to analyze the way that he's going to about to throw the slingshot, right? That's what it is,
Yeah.
to the Goliath. So I always put those in contrast to one another, and I think it's really interesting. There's another one as well, but I'm forgetting the other David. Um,
Donatello.
Donatello's David. Yes, good job. um, but the
He's
three
the
of them
big
are
one.
really, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, the other guy. But no, they're always really interesting to put. I know, right? They're always very interesting to put together, right? Because they're doing something very different and they
Yeah.
have been captured in different moments. I think Donatello's David is the one where he has just, slayed the
He's way more
Goliath. But
chill.
it's very, yeah, exactly. And it's always like, so the David by Michelangelo is just about to do something. Bernini's caught in motion. The Donatello one is post death, right, of the Goliath, which is really cool.
Which is really interesting if you think about it in perspective of art history, because Donatello is like early Renaissance, almost still medieval.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has like this very stoic thing,
Yeah.
right? The David is stuck in between mannerism and Renaissance. So it's starting to show drama, but it's still like very like static until you look at him from above. And then you have the last one, and that one is the drama, right?
Oh, it's
Which is
gorgeous.
mannerism / Baroque, all that stuff.
Slash
So
Baroque, exactly.
I think that's very interesting. But okay, so anyhow, like that changed the. We went from La Pieta to David, which always happens every time you talk
It
about
always
Michelangelo.
happens.
You end up talking about
Yeah.
something else. Uh by the way, when I talk about like painting women, it's like Michelangelo literally drew a man and added 2 oranges to the chest, and that was a woman. I to this day do not understand that. And as the same as with who's the guy that I forgot his name that paints the Venus standing on the shell.
Botticelli.
Botticelli, thank you. Botticelli cannot paint a foot to save his life. And it's so funny to me, like those things. But anyhow, it's also work that I really like. So anything else you want to add to that one?
To the Pieta? No, I think I spoke
Yeah.
when then we covered that and also spoke about the David. It's all related.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So now we jump in time all the way to the 19th century, and we're talking about Van Gogh. So anyhow, Van Gogh is like work most people come into contact with in terms of art. Like you're a child and you are already getting in touch with the Van Gogh, right? Like it's this thing. Like everybody's aware of the Van Gogh, at least in the Western Hemisphere and Westernized cultures. I mean, me being Mexican, all that. Uh, it's one of the first works you see that's like art, right? It's like one of these things that's safe to show a child. It's very colorful. It's very story like, right? And that's pretty much what attracted me to the work. Like there's no art history behind this one. Like for me, the Van Gogh was like my first contact with art. Like I had no idea who Van Gogh or Van Gogh was. I had no clue whatsoever about expressionism, impressionism, any of that. Like I had no clue what it was. But there was something about it. Like it's always been this work that calls to me. It's in my bedroom, like a print of it, which is like the most basic thing ever. But I really like this painting, and it's been an experience to me because I've seen it live, and the realization of the impasto was like so shocking to me. So for anyone that doesn't know, like impasto is this technique where like the paint is like slapped into the canvas. It has like volume, like literally it's like topographical. So it's very much a 3D work, and you don't realize that when you see it in prints. You don't see that in pictures and video, all that. And I think that that's something that we missed. And that's the thing that made it important to me. When I realized that this work had a volume, that had a three-dimensionality, and it's absolutely purposeful. It's not like, oh, well, he doesn't know how to paint. He just threw paint into the canvas, right? And it made me realize that art had like all these other things that you had to look for, right? Like, okay, there's always a myth about him and the ear, which by the way, it wasn't the whole ear, because people always think that he chopped his whole ear off. It was just a little bit here. It wasn't like, like complete mutilation. Anyhow, but yeah, that's a work that really called to me more than anything. So I don't know if you want to add something to that.
We saw it in person when we went to the MoMA, no? It was fantastic.
Yeah, we did.
Of course, he had all these different people. Like it almost has an aura. I mean, I hate using that word because it's so charged, historically charged, but it definitely has that. And yeah, we can go into a conversation about that another time. But it definitely has that appeal, and people really are drawn to it for its, some people always think about the sentimental historical aspect of the piece and how it was created and when it was created and at what time, in his life that something like that was created. But also it quickly reminds me of the Doctor Who episode. The Doctor Who episode.
I know what you're talking about.
I bawl. It's so, it left quite an impression on me, that episode, right? Because what happens is that Van Gogh, I guess, travels in time. I don't know it too well. And then he sees how many people appreciate his work now and being in institutions, right, in museums and stuff like that. So one of the scenes is like him crying, right, being so overwhelmed by this appreciation. And so that really, when I teach the Van Gogh piece, I always put the video together because it's so emblematic, right, of thinking about how it's always that thought, how would an artist nowadays from back in the day think about how its work is being received, but also how it's being taught and thought about in a different way than what the intention was, at the time that they created the work, which is always something that I think about. It's very interesting.
I watched that episode. It's really, really good. Yeah, Van Gogh is this thing that's like very influential. A lot of people get into art because of him. I certainly did. It's the very most basic thing, but at the same time, like you said, like there's something undeniably attractive about it.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about Van Gogh, I want to address something that just happened, which is the Just Stop Oil controversy, which, I mean, pretty much everybody's seen it. They took a sip of can. They were complaining about the cost of living and oil companies and climate change and all that. And then they threw, thank you. They threw the soup from a can into the painting, into the the sunflowers, which it's very calculated because obviously they chose a painting that they couldn't actually paint damage, which already is like, okay, well, is your statement really as strong as you think it is? And then gluing yourself and all that. Now, there's a lot of controversy, not in what they did, because there's a whole history of artists messing up with artist work and protesters attacking works. But that's not it. Like the thing is, there's two camps. There's one camp to say like these are very confused activists, right? The thing is, they almost look like a parody of what an activist looks like. And the other one is, if you trace the money, it gets interesting because they are funded through. So Just Stop Oil is part of climate action something. Oh, I had the name. Oh my god. Well, this other organization that funds other groups that deal with climate change and all these things, right? But one of the founders of that is one of the Getty Harrises. So Getty was an oil company for a while, and so she's supporting like all these causes. But it's funny because the causes that she supports are almost always parodies of like activism. So there's this one and there's another one I can't remember. It's about also climate change. It has a very God. Let me check real quick. Anyhow, and the theory, or the conspiracy theory, if you want to call it that, is that this is like the oil companies funding these things with the purpose of making activists look ridiculous. And the thing is, Just Stop Oil takes donations in crypto. So that in itself is iffy, right? Because you can't, like, one of the main causes of oil, of energy consumption and all these is crypto.
Exactly.
So it almost seems, and if you look at their website, everything is so well done. Like it looks like a corporate website. So I personally do think that this is a way of like dumbing it down. And like the people that don't agree with this, they say, well, she's always funded like ecological things. She's obviously guilty about her where her money comes from, but she's not rejecting this money, even though she's using it. Like she gets a tax break every time she donates. Let's not pretend that this is an altruistic thing. Yeah. So it's almost like I sort of got like it's very fake to me. I do believe that they're a plant of some form. If they're not, they're like incredibly dumb, like to the point of almost parody. And I think that's a little bit too on the nose. Like I don't know. I've seen people that don't think things through, but they don't have websites like this. They don't take crypto. They don't have this whole marketing thing ready, right?
So it's very calculated.
Yeah, exactly. Why did they choose a painting that has a protection then, right? Why didn't they attack something that didn't have a cover? It's very like suspicious, right?
I see.
I don't know what you think.
No, it's a very complicated, very complex situation. But like you said, it's a very dumbed down form of activism. The one thing that I did read in one of the articles about this situation is a lot of them are calling them performance artists type thing, which performance art is a bad name, unfortunately. But other people were saying why tomato soup, right? Why that? And so I think some people were, this article was saying perhaps they got confused and thought that it was like an Andy Warhol thing, and it's a whole debacle, right? But I was talking to this with a friend of mine, and he's very sensible. He said, well, tomato soup has a lot of acidity to it. So it could potentially ruin a painting, because of it's one of those things. But yes, the fact that they chose something that has a cover is very suspicious, right? They were concerned about the repercussions of actually damaging a piece, or I don't know. Oh, the other one was when someone threw a cake. Was
Oh
that the
yes,
one? Yeah, but I don't remember the piece that they threw a cake at. The Mona
I
Lisa, I
don't
think.
remember you. Oh, was it? Oh,
How was it?
okay. So I don't know. I can't remember. I found the thing. Like, so it's Eileen Getty, who is the granddaughter of the Getty Oil founder, and she funds a climate emergency fund. Okay, so those are the guys that are like funding Just Stop Oil, but she's always boosting like these very like dubious groups.
Hmm.
So it's always like extreme activists that like you know take things sometimes a little bit too far and to the point of like damaging human life and things like that. So it's always like, why are you doing this? Like, because you know she has friends and like maybe her family and herself is not no longer part of oil, but these people like I come from like the tiny version of this right in my country, and these people are always in network. Like it's not just oh she's no longer an oil heiress, like she's no longer an oil that doesn't matter. No, because she has people that have something that she wants, so she will help people to get what she wants. So
Hmm.
it's to me it sounds very much planned. But
Yeah.
anyhow, let's
No,
move
no,
on to your next. Oh, sorry. Do you
no,
have
go ahead.
anything else to add?
No, 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 no.
Okay,
Let's run
so
into a
let's
very
move on to
interesting
your work.
political.
We got
Um,
political.
it got very political very quickly.
I mean,
Um,
it's hard. What do you expect?
exactly. Isn't all art political? Even if some people say that it isn't, that's a conversation to be had.
Yeah,
Um,
go on.
but yeah, yes, the next work that I have is The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, um, by Bernini, and it's at the Rome Raimondi Chapel. Um, so for this piece, just to give some context, it's the Teresa of Avila is this Carmelite, in a Carmelite nun, sorry, I should say, and she has this autobiography called The Life of Saint Teresa of Jesus. And so this is a moment where you have an angel with a spear about to thrust it into Saint Teresa. And so this is supposed to, be her experience of religious ecstasy with her encounter of the angel as well. And I just want to read a little excerpt of the autobiography, just a small one, because it actually gives you more indication of the I don't want to use the word sacred or profane necessarily in this piece, but just like the sensual and very interesting way in which she talks about this religious experience, right? Okay, so she starts with, I saw in his hand a long spear of gold, and at the iron's point there seemed to be a little fire. He appeared to me to be thrusting it at times into my heart and to pierce my very entrails. When he drew it out, he seemed to draw them out also, and to leave me all on fire with a great love of God. So when I teach this piece, I always make sure that someone reads this little, it's a much longer excerpt, obviously. But it makes many students uncomfortable with this idea of, these images of thrusting, the
Mhm.
spear in a specific, very sensual ecstasy, type of way. And so for me, what's important about this work that really inspired me is thinking about, first of all, the sculpture is gorgeous. In the way that her cloak is flowing as if it's in movement, as if it's, floating in air almost as well, very cloud-like. Her body is covered in such a way that protects the identity of the nun, as this religious person, but also the contrast between what she says in her autobiography, and her religious experience is very fascinating to me. I think there's this juxtaposition that happens with this piece, um, and just the way that I think if I remember correctly, it's located in a chapel where it has theater seating. And so what happens is that you have these individual sculptures of these people, patrons, I think that they are. And so they're looking at the scene of the ecstasy of Saint Teresa. So that's one of, again, it's this play of vision and how we look at and how things are displayed, and the ideas of presentation of artworks too that really drew me into this piece and made me love Bernini all that more.
Yeah, Bernini is a very, very well. First of all, he's very prolific. He basically built Rome after the whole sacking and everything. He's the one person that was like creating the Rome that we know now, like with the Renaissance buildings, the sculptures everywhere, the elephant with the obelisk, all these things, right? So he's always been like a very, very influential artist, but I think that he is not as well known as like the four Ninja Turtles. Like I mean, not in art history, but when we talk about the big Renaissance artists, it's always Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. It's never Bernini, right? Like Bernini is weird because he fell through the cracks for some reason for a while.
But he's also from a different here, like this is post-Renaissance too, right?
Well, yes, yeah, but it's still like, well, yeah, you're right. It's me. Mistake. But the thing is, like, it's like the vague Italian artist, and he doesn't appear really. Like, he's forgotten about in a way, even though he created Rome. In a way. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I forgot it. He's Baroque more than anything else. But at the same time, it's one of the most important works, and the only reason a lot of people know about it is why, right?
Why?
Oh, you don't? You're gonna love this because you're a big reader. Angels and Demons, the book by the same guy that did the Da Vinci Code.
The Dan Brown.
So Dan Brown, thank you. Yes. So he's famous because of that. He's famous, like people now know the Agony Saint theories because it's part of one of the, and I use this word very generously, riddles in the book. So I always found that like interesting, like why people don't know about this man that did so many things in Rome, right? And in the Vatican, if we're going to be very pedantic about it being its own country and all that. But yeah, so it's a very good work. It's been given a lot of extra baggage, I think. I do agree that there's a level of sensuality, there's a level of innuendo, absolutely. But there's like people are like, no, it's definitely sex. And it's like, and this comes to that thing of assigning values, contemporary values to people in the past, right?
Yes, we had this conversation in class, actually, the modern lens, we were calling it, or the modern gaze. And it's so, well, it's something, it's tricky. It's something that we cannot get rid of because we look at things through our perspective. But how can we look at historical pieces or anything historical, right? Objectively, can you?
Exactly, and that's not possible. And I'm very much in the school of half of art is horny. In terms of, well, like people would go away and women would give men portraits of themselves, often in nude. We all know why that was, even though we try to pretend it's not, right? We have things that we call baculi, which were actually like sexual aids and things like that, but we pretend that they're ritual. So that's because we're imposing our own thing. But at the same time, when you look at the ecstasy of Santa Teresa, it gets tricky because how can we interpret someone's religious epiphanies in a way that is not possible in the 21st century? Like who was it? Oh, Nietzsche. Like Nietzsche said, like, we killed God, right? Well, God is dead and we killed him. And that's exactly what he means. Like, we can no longer engage with the religious, with the religious things in the same way that we used to back before, like, the Enlightenment. So we interpret Santa Teresa in that same way by thinking of it in terms of contemporary interpretations of religion. And with this, even the most religious people have this like little bit of a disconnect in terms of like, well, it's not literal, right? But someone in the Renaissance, it probably was literal. So because to
Right.
them it was God, it was absolutely God. There was no question about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, there were a few people who were like, oh no, there's no God or something, but generally they were burned states or something. But yeah, this thing is a very complicated work because of that, because we see it so much through our eyes.
We do. The other important piece that I wanted to mention about the work is that it was sort of a response as well to the, not necessarily the secularization of, what was
Mm,
happening at the time, but it was actually a response in its, there's a specific word for it, but it was trying to gain more viewers and more people of faith in order to turn them back into Catholicism as well, or you know what I mean.
mhm.
So this is one of the ways that they were trying to achieve this. So it was very
Yes,
strategic. There's a word for it, but I don't remember right now. But it was a very strategic piece too, and trying to, um, you know, harken it back to like this corporeal experience as well that anyone could have, but a very
yeah,
personal one. And that's the other part of it that's I think really important to mention for it.
exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very complicated, and it's a very interesting because of that. I think it's one of those pieces for conversation that art historians get lost in for ages, and you can talk and talk and not come to any consensus because everybody sees it differently.
Mhm.
Anyhow, now we again move forward to the 19th century, and so now we're going to talk about the Pre-Raphaelites, which is outside of new media art my favorite artistic movement. So the Pre-Raphaelites, everybody knows them, even though nobody knows them. Like again, it's one of those works that you ask people and everybody has seen one. It's been a very influential movement, but nobody seems to know them. So this is a group of artists that started in and they were looking at works in the Renaissance, in the Baroque movement, neoclassicism, all these things, and they're romantics, right? Like the thing about neoclassicism, I mean, sorry, no, the Pre-Raphaelites, is that they're romantics first and foremost. Like this is this movement that looks back into the past, into things that had been when it was better. So in a way, they're conservatives, right? But at the same time, they're rejecting contemporary work that they consider polluted by the Renaissance. So
Mm.
they're trying to go back to medieval artwork, right? And that is why everything in the Pre-Raphaelite work is stretched out, right? It's one of the things, like they're on purpose, they're stretching the figures to make them look more medieval, right? Which is
Mm.
a thing that you see a lot, and the stretchier a figure is, the closer it is to God, and that's why it's the same reason for Gothic architecture with the
Yeah.
very long spires and all that, and it's the whole point is that. And they choose the name Pre-Raphaelites themselves. This is one of those movements that actually names themselves, unlike Impressionism and other ones, like the Fauves. And they choose this because they think that Raphael is the beginning of the end for artwork that's like about
Mm.
feeling, right?
Yeah.
They're rejecting things like David, right? They're rejecting very nationalistic work. They're rejecting a lot of things. And they're existing in this very interesting period in time, right? Because they see modernity, they see the Industrial Revolution, they see all these things, and they're feeling very, very much like we are right now with technology, right? And I think that's why, like, I'm so connected to them in terms of like my career, my aesthetics, and all these things. It's that they're looking at the changes that are happening right now, and they can see that something is wrong. They don't know exactly what it is, but they say, okay, well, we used to live better. People didn't have to work in factories for 16 hours. Children weren't dying in machines back then, right? Yeah, we had to plague, but and so they're trying to do this thing where they're rejecting all these modern things. And it's also where arts and crafts comes from, the movement from
Mhm.
with Macintosh and all these guys. Um, and so Ellen Terry as Lady Macbeth by John Singer Sargent is one of those works. I almost put Ophelia, but Ophelia is like so cliche.
I was just about to say, why didn't you pick Ophelia? It's very iconic.
Because I like it. I do like it. And I think of the Pre-Raphaelites. Singer is one of the better ones. Because Dante is, he was more of a poet. Yeah,
Mhm.
he was more of a poet than a painter. Anyway, this painting, there's so much about it. It's like, okay, so it's Lady Macbeth. It's Shakespeare. It's also very Arthurian in how she's represented. She's almost like very much Guinevere, right? In a way. I don't know why that's the reference I always get from her. Like looking at her, I don't think of Lady Macbeth. I don't think of things like that. I think of Guinevere for some reason. But
Mhm.
it's a very, very interesting work. It has all this gravitas in the painting, right? It has almost no background, which is really interesting. It also goes back to medieval times where backgrounds and depth of field didn't exist, right? Because that's one of the artifices that the pre-Raphaelites were trying to get rid of. So they go back to these um, more mundane things, and they say mundane, but that's debatable. They're definitely inspired by Courbet. Courbet,
Courbet. Mhm.
Courbet. Yeah. So they're looking at more like common, more regular things, right? Even though they're choosing these themes of Macbeth and Arthurian legends and all this.
Mhm.
Um, but it also has a lot of symbolism. Like they're very much stuck in the romanticism, the romantic period, and looking at flowers and the meanings of these flowers. So it's very interesting that you can take a look at these paintings and tell what they wanted to tell you just by the flowers that they're holding, that they're in the background, all this vegetation. And then you jump in forward and you go to the 20th century, and you have Art Nouveau. And Art Nouveau is also very much inspired by the Pre-Raphaelites. You can take an Alphonse Mucha um, painting, or well, illustration actually, and
Mhm.
compare it to a Pre-Raphaelite work, and you can see the similarities, like very, very,
Interesting.
very much in front of yourself. And I don't know. That's why I like this painting. Well, in generally, I would say all of the Pre-Raphaelites, but in particularly John Singer Sargent really speaks to me. And then we can even talk about like the whole controversy about his painting with the black dress and the strap that's falling down, and how that was a
Mhm.
complete controversy. That was also a fun one I also considered. But I think
Mhm.
aesthetically, I like this one better, even though the other one has more significance in that way.
Right.
Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, so that's why I like this one and why it touches me in some ways.
No, I think what's okay. So you said a couple of things that I wanted to emphasize. One of them is this reaction or response against the technological innovation and industrialization that was happening at the time, which is really interesting, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of movements. I feel as if when you get later into the 20th century, there is this also movement of glorifying the pre-industrialized,
Mm.
you know, era or, way of living, which is why you get all of these different movements that happen in the 20th century. That were like, "Well, let's go back to this idyllic moment
A
before the
simpler
industrial."
time.
Exactly, a simpler time. And I think this is why I wonder what art is going to look like, or what art is looking like right now, because you also have this commentary about why don't we go back to a simpler time when we didn't have social media, for example,
Mm.
etc., or we go back to the telephone or mail. What is a snail mail? um,
Oh god.
but exactly, but art is always like that, right? Art is always going to be a response to the times, and I think that's what really draws me to art history, but also in thinking about art as this sort of way, but also not only just a response to the times, but also a response to historicity itself, right? It goes back, it always looks back and always looks forward, but mostly it looks back to this time that they want to not necessarily mimic, but recuperate some of those
Yeah.
elements, right, that they want to put forward. And that's happened with neoclassicism, the Renaissance, right? They go back to
Mhm.
antiquity to do these things.
Which, yeah, well, there's this thing that we have to very much highlight, though, in that this is a very Western thing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you talk about art history in outside of Western canon and all that, it doesn't really follow the same ideas. It doesn't really follow the same
That is true.
concepts. In terms of like even art itself, like the concept of art as we have it doesn't exist in other parts of the world. Like only once you get westernized, we have art as we think of it as art for art, right?
Art for art's sake, yes.
Yeah. But going back to what you're saying, like the pendulum, it's a pendulum
It
basically.
is.
So you have this very religious thing, which is the medieval period, Roman. What is it? The Roman. Yeah, it's Gothic, Roman, and then it's Renaissance, right? It's
It
Roman
goes
something. I can't remember exactly what
Romanesque,
it's called. Romanesque.
Romanesque.
Thank you. Yeah.
It goes Romanesque, Gothic, then yeah, the rest.
Oh,
Because the Gothic was a
yeah, it's
response
the
to
other way.
Romanesque.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So yeah, so
I
you
just
have
taught
like
this in
the.
my class, that's why.
I always get it mixed because I don't talk about it enough. But yeah, so you have the Romanesque, the Gothic, and then you have Renaissance, right? And it's going back and looking back at the period with where Christianity is not really there in a way, but it's all still religious work, a lot of it, but it's also going into profane subjects. So you have things like Venus, and you have things like the gods and Zeus and all these things, right?
Mhm.
And then you have the church, and the church goes, hey, hold on a minute. You're kind of losing the plot here. Let's go back
Let's
to
rein it
religion.
in.
Yeah, exactly. And we get Manierism to a lesser degree, and then Baroque, right? But then artists are like, okay, well, Baroque becomes the main form of art, and then it kind of loses its way and becomes like this thing for rich people, Louis XVI, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, okay, no, we have to focus on the human. So now we go back into neoclassical, right? And then people are like, no, but neoclassical is leading us down this way of nationalism and all these things. Let's go into the romantics, which is where
Yeah.
the Pre-Raphaelites are. And then we have, okay, well, no, art has become very static. We have cameras now that can recreate things. Why am we creating realistic things? Let's go into the abstract, and you get all these things like abstractions, pragmatism, blah 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 blah. And
Mhm.
it's just bouncing back and forth. But the interesting thing is, in the 20th century, it kind of stops in a way.
Mhm.
It becomes personal rather than
I would say it becomes very
about
political.
society. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. It becomes political, but it's still personal in a way, because it's not about the broader themes of a society. It's more about like the politics of a group or another group or another person, rather than being like, okay, we're rejecting the whole of the Renaissance. Okay, we're rejecting the whole of the neoclassical. It
Yeah.
became more of a, I want to make this statement about this thing in life. It got broader, but at the same time got like narrower in a way.
Yeah. No, like I said, it was definitely a response to the political climate at the time, if we're thinking
Yeah,
about the West, right? But I also want
yeah,
to
yeah.
like emphasize what you said, that a outside the West, you know, this is the conversation that I have. Well, what is the difference between an artwork and an artifact, right? For example.
Yeah.
And in other cultures, right, especially in non-West, art is more integrated into the culture and everyday life, I think, right?
It has a
It's
use.
it has a use. Yeah, exactly. Which brings, a lot of issues, especially in museums, which, you're a specialist in, right? And how to display these objects that, you know, ethnographic objects, right? Or
Mhm.
artifacts, and how do we put these things together, or maybe not, or you sequester them into these different groups, like an artwork, like a traditional painting, sculpture, etc.,
Yeah.
from the rest, which is very bizarre to me.
Let's jump to the next one.
Sure. The one that I'm going to touch upon is Bill Viola, The Crossing. And I think it makes a lot of sense because we've been talking, at least for me, and during our conversations a lot about religious artworks too. And the crossing is
Mm.
a very, let me see here. The crossing is one of those pieces that actually a version of that or a different iteration of that I saw in the Exteresa Arte Actual in Mexico City. And I literally just bumped into it, which was super exciting. And I saw, oh my God, Bill Viola. And it was for the exhibition Tiempo Suspendido, right? But in any case, the crossing was shot with high-speed film, 300 frames per second. So there was a lot of attention to detail that cannot be discerned by the naked eye, for example. Um, but the piece itself, it's about Catholicism, all these spiritual ritual traditions. And so a lot of people have said that he's been inspired by Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. Right? And of importance to new media and technologies, he's one of the first ones in the 1970s to actually, use new video technologies in order to create artworks as well. And so for me, this piece um, is just, it blew my mind the first time I saw it, not only for its religious and spiritual connotations, but also the way that it was created. I think, you have someone being immold, I think that's the word used, immold by fire, right? And you have the other person being um, drenched in water and all these different connotations that you have, with fire and water and ritual and what's the other word I'm looking for? Um, I forget right now. But in any case, um, just the way that you get all these different experiences, and it's quite an experience because usually his works are actually located in or displayed or installed rather in churches, which already gives it a specific connotation already. And so people, when I show this work to my students, right, they said, oh, that's the resurrection, or oh, it's, you know, purification, etc., in different ways. So that for me, it's one of those most important works that really inspired
Yeah.
me to continue working in not only in media, right, but also in teaching art history too.
Well, you did see it in an ex-convent to begin with.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. Exactly. I forgot to mention that.
So, yeah. I have a question though, because I know this work as Martyrs.
As
What's the
what?
difference between the crossing and Martyrs?
Martyrs.
Mártires. Yeah.
I think so. He has done a lot of what does martyrs look like? I'm trying to remember it because he
It's
has so
literally
many
those
different
paintings. It's those videos. It's earth, wind, fire, and water, and it's people being martyred by those four elements.
elements. Uh-huh.
And
So,
then what is the crossing? Because it's confusing to me. Because when you Google martyrs and then you Google crossing, it's the same thing.
mhm. I think the thing is that he has different iterations. So, for example, when I saw the um the works
Oh no,
from
I
the
got it.
Exodus Arte Actual. Hmm?
I just found the explanation. Sorry.
No, go
So
ahead.
the whole space is the crossing. Each one of the four videos, each one is a martyr, and then one is water, one is earth, one is fire, one is whatever. When I think I missed. So yeah, okay. Sorry. Yeah, the crossing is the whole thing, and the specific artworks, the four artworks together, are called the martyrs.
Uh-huh. Okay. He
Okay,
also
sorry.
has different iterations of it. Like he had one with Tristan, these historical figures. And there was one piece at the Exodus Arte Actual that I saw of a person being on a slab, but they're being elevated while the rain is falling on them, right? So again, it's a very
Mm.
similar idea, but exactly. And then there was one, the Fire Woman, I think it was called in English, where she holds her hands out like this and she's caught in fire and then she slowly drops into the water and disappears. It was quite impactful. And again, I think situating them in these specific religious spaces, right, gives the pieces that much more currency and importance as well in the way that we interpret these things. So again, it's all about, for me at least, in art history, it's the
Yeah.
way that we view certain things and how they are presented to us, right, that impact us, but also allow us to give different interpretations of it.
And also, like, I don't know if people notice, but it's running backwards, and it's also in
Mhm.
slow motion. So I think that
So
that's also a thing
exactly.
about this work. It's really interesting. I do like it. I've seen. I haven't had chance to look at it in person, so I've only read about it and looked at it, remotely.
It's an experience to be had, and it's so
I
different when you see it on a YouTube
can
video
imagine.
from being there in a space, right?
Yeah, yeah. The size probably changes the whole concept of everything, and I'm pretty sure it's a much more. I mean, it's not that it's not, but it's a much more impressive thing if you see it in
Yeah,
person, right?
yeah.
And I think that applies to a lot of work. Like you have to see it, even things like that look so stupid and simple, like Eve Klein blue painting, International Blue.
Yeah.
International Blue does not photograph well, right?
Mhm.
Once you go and you see that this color literally attacks your eyes, changes your perception of the work, and the fact that he created that color. So I think
Yeah.
it's similar in this case. It's a thing, well, not color, but it's the presence of being in the space, the sound, the reverberation of the actual, like, building and all these things. In fact, it's perception, because it
Yeah.
does seem like a very unimpressive thing if you look at it in a video. I think if you're not aware of everything that's around it. But yeah, I think it's a really good choice. It's a really interesting work, and it's a new
Mhm.
media work, which is what we, as an institution, kind of cared about in terms of like what we exhibit. And I think it would be a disservice to show it in this type of context, even though it would help give it more reach, right? So this is a piece that, even though it's digital, it has to exist physically.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that's a very
exactly.
important thing. So now we're going to move to my last work, which is John Smith. Yes, the most boring name in the planet, and it's called "The Girl Chewing Gum." Now we're gonna have to watch a little bit of it, and then we're gonna skip to the middle, and then we're gonna skip to the end, and then I'll talk because it has to be experienced to be understood.
Slowly move the trailer to the left, and I want the little girl to run across now. Hold that trailer there. Now move the trailer off.
Okay, skip to the middle, please.
Right, now I want the old coat with a white imitation fur collar. They'll be talking to each other and looking around them. Now I want the man coming in from the left in the grey peak cap to put on his glasses. The boy will look at his watch and yawn, then look at it again and say something to his mother about the time. The three children eating chips, the French woman, the window cleaner in his van, the greengrocer, the pigeon, the red Jaguar, the taxi, the man, the van, the Negro with the briefcase and the newspaper, the woman firmly gripping the hands of her two young sons. They stop,
Okay, and
and
now
now they
the
cross the
end.
road. The man in the grey peak cap takes off his...
Okay, let's stop there. Okay, so this is John Smith's "The Girl Chewing Gum." It's one of the works that really made me realize that I want to get into new media art, because when you start looking at it, it, like, if you I was lucky enough to walk in at the very beginning of it. So it was at Tate Liverpool, and I was doing an internship there back then, and I was doing a survey of all the works, and I walk in and it's just beginning because we had just turned all the exhibitions, and you see it and it begins with, like, okay, so I want this person to cross the street, look to the left, move to the right, okay, do the shuffle or whatever. And you keep watching, and this voice, which is John Smith, is directing people, right? And that illusion goes on and on for about halfway through the video. But eventually, but you start like doubting, like, how was he controlling like so many things? Because he's calling them out and they're happening like seconds after, right? But little by little, you realize that he's directing things that there's no way could have been directed. So, like the pigeon, I want the pigeon to take 3 steps to the left, do 2 pecks, stand up, turn to the left, and fly away towards the upper right corner of the frame. And it's like, a pigeon cannot do that, right? And you keep watching, and then you start realizing that he's not directing, he's narrating, right? So your whole interpretation of the work changes as soon as that clicks in your head, right? So he's questioning so many things about how the film works, about how we interpret film, how we interpret what we're being shown, right? Because we look at it and we're used to seeing people talking at actors, at things, and all of a sudden the illusion is broken and he's reacting to the video, not the other way around. So it's this questioning of who's the director, who's the consumer, who is interacting with whom, because it's, in a way, it's an interactive work. It's not interactive with us, and it is to a degree, but it's more like interacting with him. Like he's interacting with film, right? In a way that's not traditionally done. And all these layers of meaning were like something I did not expect, especially when I had a very, well, not negative, but I wasn't that gracious with video art in a way, right? Because, and let's face it, there's video art and then there's video art. And this is one of those pieces that are like, okay, this is video art. And it changed everything. It's like, okay, so this is a form, an art form that I'm really interested in. And I want to see what's possible with it. And it kind of triggered this whole thing. That was back in 2010. So I didn't even knew new media was a thing back then. It took me until 2015 to really, really embrace what it was. I was interested in video games, but back then in 2010, I was a museology student. I wasn't an art historian. So it was a different context in which I approached the work, but it is this work that catalyzed everything. And it led to me being here now in the exhibition space. Well, yeah, the exhibition space that is Header Footer Gallery, where you can now see all these kind of work that we're interested in, right? Like we've seen things like what Haruko Itami has done. We've seen what Chloe Lee has been doing. And well, your own curation work with the gallery before I was in here. All those things are a result of interest in new media art and artworks that made us look at works and decide that they were important enough to talk about and show, which is something I don't really see that much in big institutions, right? Like video art is accepted, but everything else is like, right? So it's a difficult thing to engage with. And I think John Smith was a catalyst for me.
I see. It was a fantastic work when you showed it to me the first time. I was like, I could not believe the illusion is broken. But I think that's one of the more interesting things about art, right? There is a certain degree that there is an illusion to not only just representation of perspective, etc., shading, blah, blah, blah. But this piece in particular was, because it's a moving piece, right? You see the facade, you see it disappear before your eyes, and you're like, this needs to be interpreted in a different way, in a new light. You're forced to do this now, right? Which is fantastic for me.
It's also a nightmare of curation, this piece. So here's a quick revelation. I'm doing this Ammerman show in Connecticut for the Ammerman Technology Center. And before this show, if you had asked me what's the hardest thing to curate, I would have said interaction. I don't believe that anymore.
It's big.
To the degree that like I might write a new manual, to that degree. Like, wow. I just need someone to pay. Please pay me to do that. Anyhow, because audio work and video work can be so problematic in so many ways
Mhm.
because you have sound pollution. You can't have, and every single artist wants to be the one on the speakers, right? Everybody wants the piece to be the one that's heard throughout the space, but you cannot do that because everybody does that, and then you just have noise. So what
Yeah.
do? Do you buy speakers that are like $1,000 each, and they don't really work that well?
Mhm.
Do you put everybody on headphones, which is in
It's a
post-COVID
whole conversation. Yeah.
world is an interesting thing. Yeah, so there's so many challenges. And then video, it's like moving and it's drawing your attention. So something that, like, it's not like a painting which your brain kind of ignores until you go in front of it. If there's a video here to your right and it's twinkling or whatever, it's gonna draw your attention, right? Which is a good thing, but it's a bad thing at the same time. And so, yeah,
You have to see how works communicate with one another, right?
exactly. And it's a nightmare. It's one of the hardest things to do. Sometimes you're just like, okay, whatever, I'll just live with it. And there's not much I can do. But it does change my approach to curation a lot. Like video art has become my bugbear, my nightmare. Audio art as well. Audio art is even more challenging, though, I think, because there's nothing to draw people to it. Like, it's a
I
headphone,
see.
a pair of headphones, or is it a speaker? Is it what is it? How is it going to work? How are you going to let people know that there's audio, that audio sound, something that's invisible, is the artwork, right? Especially in a culture that sees audio nowadays as background.
Yeah.
So audio is the hardest. Video is the second hardest. And then if you have works that are interactive on top of that, that's just, I don't even want to think about that. It's a nightmare. But yeah, I guess at that point, I mean, there's something to be said about the arcade approach, which I don't know if you've ever walked into well, younger listeners will probably never have done that, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the arcade approach is everything makes noise, nobody cares, and you deal with it somehow, right? Which for some works and some shows might work, but try making that argument in a space that's traditionally considered a quiet space. I hesitate to bring this up in an institution. In this case, the Ammerman is a school, and the gallery is literally the atrium of the school. So you have students doing music class next door. So it has to be a quiet space. So how are we going to deal with that, right? Like we're dealing with it, but it's like, okay, so during the exhibition, everything is going to be on and people are going to be able to listen to it. But as soon as the classes begin, everything goes in headphones because we cannot afford the risk to put it in a way, right? We cannot afford to let people like have their education interrupted by this show. So yeah, now I think like these works are complicated to show. I think it's part of the fun of it. But yeah, it requires a lot of finesse, and it requires. I honestly would not want to do this again in like on my own, like alone, absolutely alone. Like I'm not alone at the end. That's a good thing. But if I was to do it on my own, I would need people to help me to be back up because really, it's not possible for one person to handle all these logistics. And I think that's what makes the media art curation so complicated and why so many people are scared of it.
I think it's because we cannot rely anymore on the white cube to save us.
Yeah.
Or to like integrate that into new media. It just doesn't work. I went to an exhibition just very quickly, who's curated by a very big curator, very well known. And there was a piece of artificial intelligence sculpture where you're supposed to interact with it. But the problem was because there was another piece in the back that had audio, the sculpture picked up that audio, and so you weren't able to interact with it. It was so frustrating, but it was one of the difficulties of curating new media artworks, right?
Yeah, sometimes you just like shove it in a corner where it doesn't disturb anything else. And that's not a good answer, right? But sometimes, well, I didn't have to do that right now, like this time. But there is certainly this moment of exasperation where you just shove it somewhere else, right? Like put it in the stairwell, right? It's like I don't have the space, or because a lot of new media work nowadays requires purpose-built spaces. It requires its own gallery space. It's like, okay, hold on. Like, can you imagine doing a projection? And Harshini maybe wants to jump in, maybe not. Can you imagine a show that's all projection based? I mean, we saw one, if you remember, the Journey Le Messier.
Oh, yes.
But two of the pieces were silent. The one that made noise was in its own room. The other one that made noise was in its other own room. And the other one that made noise was in its own room. So that's 4 works taking an entire museum. It's a nightmare. It's a curatorial nightmare.
Yes, it's a curatorial nightmare. Well, this could be an entire show about curating, new media artworks, which could be interesting to do, especially because we have a specialist that does this.
We can try that. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Anyhow, so I think we're out of time. Rambled for long enough. But well, thank you all. Thank you, Harshini, for being our producer as always. Thank you, Constanza, for being the co-host and bringing all that art history knowledge, which it's much more massive than mine is. And well, I think this is it for us. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Yes, I have to do that every single time. And see you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.